Well, it broke out again. I don't know why I did. I was saying that I'm doing copyright things, but it's okay. So I hope people find this. And I also realized I forgot to put the date on the last one. So just in case people can't find the last one, I'm going to say it real quick again. Shout out to Thatcher for teaching me about ducks. And then starring Voyages of Dawn Treader. So I'm going to start one more time. I only got one sentence in, so we're going to try again. Okay. Chapter 1. The Picture in the Bedroom. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrub, and he almost deserved it. His parents called him Eustace Clarence, and masters, or teachers, called him Scrub. I can't tell you how his friends spoke of him, for he had none. He didn't call his father and mother, but Harold and Alberta. They were very up to date and advanced people. They were vegetarians, non smokers, and teetotalers, and wore a special kind of underclothes. In their house, there was very little furniture and very few clothes on beds, and the windows were always open. Eustace Clarence liked animals, especially beetles, if they were dead and pinned on a card. He liked books if they were books of information and had pictures of grain elevators or of fat pouring children doing exercises in model schools. Eustace Clarence disliked his cousins, the four Heavensies, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. But he was quite glad when he heard that Edmund and Lucy were coming to stay, for deep down inside him, he liked bossing and bullying. And though he was a puny little person who couldn't have stood up even to Lucy, let alone Edmund, in a fight, he knew that there are dozens of ways to give people a bad time if you are in your own home and they are only visitors. Edmund and Lucy did not at all want to come and stay with Uncle Harold and Aunt Alberta, but it really couldn't be helped. Father had got a job lecturing in America for 6 weeks that summer, and Mother was going to go with him because she hadn't had a real holiday for 10 years. It's a long time to not have a holiday. Peter was working very hard for an exam, and he was to spend the holidays being coached by old Professor Kirk, in whose house these four children had wonderful adventures long ago in the war years. If he had still been in that house, he would have had them all to stay. But he had somehow become poor since the old days and was living in a small cottage with only one bedroom to spare. Poor Professor Kirk. It would have cost too much money to take the other three all to America, and Susan had gone. Oh, and Susan had gone, so Susan went to America with the parents. Grown-ups thought her the pretty one of the family, and she was no good at schoolwork, though otherwise very old for her, very old for her age. And Mother said she would get far more out of a trip to America than the youngsters. Edmund and Lucy tried not to hold a grudge against Susan for her luck, but it was dreadful having to spend the summer holidays at their aunt's house. But it's far worse for me, said Edmund, because you at least have your own room, and I shall have to share a bedroom with that record stinker, Eustace. The story begins on an afternoon when Edmund and Lucy were stealing a few precious minutes alone together. And of course, they were all talking about Narnia, which was the name of their own private and secret country. Most of us, I suppose, have a secret country, but for most of us, it is only an imaginary country. Edmund and Lucy were luckier than other people in that respect, and their secret country was real. They had already visited it twice, not in a game or a dream, but in reality. They had gone there, of course, by magic, which is the only way of getting into Narnia. And a promise, or very nearly a promise, had been made to them in Narnia itself that they would go back someday. You may imagine that they talked about it a good deal, and they got the chance. They were all in Lucy's room, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking at a picture on the opposite wall. It was the only picture in the house that they liked. Aunt Alberta didn't like it at all. That it was why it was put away in a little back room upstairs. But she couldn't get rid of it because it had been a wedding present from someone she did not want to offend. It was a picture of a ship sailing straight towards you. Her prow was gilded and shaped like the head of a dragon, with a wide open mouth. She had only one mast and one large square sail, which was a rich purple. The sides of the ship, what you could see of them, where the gilded wings of the dragon ended, were green. She had just run to the top of one glorious blue wave, and the nearer slope of that wave came down towards you, with streaks and bubbles on it. She was obviously running fast before a wild wind, listing over a little on her port side. By the way, if you are going to read the story at all, and if you don't already, you had better get into your head that the left of the ship, when you are looking at it, is looking ahead is port, and the right is starboard. So left is port, right is starboard. All the sunlight fell on her from that side, and the water on that side was full of greens and purples. On the other, it was darker blue from the shadow of the ship. The question is, said Edmund, whether it doesn't make things worse looking at a Narnian ship when you can't get there. Even looking is better than nothing, said Lucy, and she is such a very, very Narnian ship. Still playing your old games, said Eustace Clarence, who had been listening outside the door and now came grinning into the room. Last year, when he had been staying with the Pevensies, he had managed to hear them all talking about Narnia, and he loved teasing them about it. He thought, of course, that they were making it all up. As he was far too stupid to make anything up himself, he did not approve of that. You're not wanted here, said Edmund curtly. I'm trying to think of a limerick, said Eustace, something like this. Some kids who played in the games about Narnia got gradually balmier and balmier. Well, Narnia and balmier don't rhyme to begin with, said Lucy. It's an assonance, said Eustace. Don't ask him what an assonance gummy is, said Edmund. He's only longing to be asked. Say nothing, and perhaps he'll go away. Most boys, on meeting a reception like this, would either have cleared out or flared up. Eustace did neither. He just hung about grinning and presently began talking again. Do you like that picture? He asked. For heaven's sake, don't let him get started about art and all that, said Edmund hurriedly. But Lucy, who was very truthful, had already said, Yes, I do. I like it very much. It's a rotten picture, said Eustace. You won't see it if you step outside, said Edmund. Why do you like it? Said Eustace to Lucy. Well, for one thing, said Lucy, I like it because the ship looks as if it were really moving, and the water looks as if it were really wet, and the waves look as if they were really going up and down. Of course, Eustace knew lots of answers to this, but he didn't say anything. The reason was that at the very moment he looked at the waves and saw that they did look very much indeed as if they were going upward and downward. He had only once been in a ship, and then only as far as the Isle of Wight, and had been horribly seasick. The look of the waves in the picture made him feel sick again. He turned rather green and tried another look. And then all three children were staring with open mouths. What they were seeing may be hard to believe when you read it in print, but it was almost as hard to believe when you saw it happening. The things in the picture were moving. It didn't look at all like a cinema either, like a movie theater. The colors were too real and clean and out of doors for that. Down went the prow of the ship into the wave, and up it went with a great shock of spray. And then up it went the wave behind her, and her stern and her deck became visible for the first time, and then disappeared as the next wave came to meet her, and her bows went up again. At the same moment, an exercise book, which had been lying beside Edmund on the bed, flapped, rose, and sailed through the air to the wall behind him, and Lucy felt all her hair whipping around her face as it does on a windy day. And this was a windy day, but the wind was blowing out of the pitcher towards them. And suddenly, with the wind came the noises, the swishing of waves and the slap of water against the ship's sides and the creaking and the overall high, steady roar of the air and water. But it was the smell, the wild, briny smell, which really convinced Lucy that she was not dreaming. Stop it, came Eustace's voice, squeaking with fright and bad temper. It's some silly trick you are two are playing. Stop it. I'll tell Alberta. Ow! The other two were much more accustomed to adventures, but just as exactly as Eustace Clarence said ow, they both said ow too. The reason was that a great cold salt splash had broken right out of the frame, and they were breathless from the smack of it, besides being wet through. I'll smash the rotten thing, cried Eustace, and then several things happened at the same time. Eustace rushed towards the pitcher. Edmund, who knew something about magic, sprang after him, warning him to look out and not to be a fool. Lucy grabbed him from the other side and was dragged forward. And by the time either of them had grown much smaller, or the pitcher had grown much, and by this time either they had grown much smaller, or the pitcher had grown much bigger. Eustace tried to pull it off with the wall and found himself standing on the frame. In front of him was not glass but real sea, and the wind and waves rushing up to the frames as they might have to a rock. He lost his head and clutched at the other two who had jumped up beside him. There was a second of struggling and shouting, and just as they thought they had got balance, a great blue roller coaster surged up around them, swept them off their feet, and drew them down into the sea. Eustace's despairing cry suddenly ended as the water got into his mouth. Lucy thanked her stars that she had worked harder at her swimming lessons this summertime. It is true that she would have got on much better if she had used a slower stroke, and also that the water felt a great deal colder than it had looked while only in the pitcher. Still, she kept her head and kicked her shoes off, and as everyone ought to who falls into deep water in their clothes. She even kept her mouth shut and closed her eyes. Oh no, kept her mouth shut and opened her eyes. They were still quite near the ship. She saw its green side towering high above them, and people looking at her from the deck. Then, as one might have expected, Eustace clutched at her in panic, and both of them went down into the water. When they both came up again, she saw a white figure diving off the ship's side. Edmund was close beside her now, treading water, and had caught the arms of the howling Eustace. Then someone else, whose face was vaguely familiar, slipped an arm from under her from the other side. There was a lot of shouting going on from the ship, heads crowding together from the bulwarks, ropes being thrown. Edmund and the stranger were fastening ropes around her. After that followed what seemed a very long delay, during which her face got blue and her teeth began to chatter. In reality, the delay was not very long. They were waiting till the moment when she could be got on board the ship without being dashed against the side. Even with all their best endeavors, she had a bruised knee when she finally stood, dripping and shivering on the deck. After her, Edmund was heaved up, and then the miserable Eustace. Last of all came the stranger, a golden-headed boy, some years older than herself. And that's what we're going to have for today. And I hoped that you enjoyed story time, and I hope that all of you have a great day, and I will see you next time. Yes, we'll see you next time. All right.